This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
We invented the educational software market. It really didn't exist until we came along. We were making our first packaging run. We were just so excited, and all the packages melted. I was like, oh, no.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. David Seuss was co-founder of Spinnaker Software. Spinnaker was one of the first companies to focus exclusively on educational software. Spinnaker's lineup included Snooper Troops, Delta Drawing, FaceMaker, Adventure Creator, In Search of the Most Amazing Thing, KinderComp, and many other titles. This interview took place on September 11th, 2017.
So I'm from the South. You hear a Southern accent. I grew up in Alabama, Georgia Tech, engineering degree. Worked as an engineer for several years in manufacturing. Then went off to the Harvard Business School, got an MBA, joined the Boston Consulting Group out of B School. And I was working at BCG, and I had a colleague there who was very entrepreneurial and was constantly looking for a business to start. And the software thing was sort of starting to happen. The Apple computer was shipping for the first time in a sort of finished computer state. And we were watching PCs starting to be introduced. And I got an assignment at BCG that required me to interview a lot of software companies. And I kept meeting these people who had started software companies and who had to cut short the interview I had with them because they needed to go out to the airport and take their private jet somewhere. I kept thinking, wait a minute, this entrepreneurial thing looks like it's it's working for a lot of people. So along the way, I got interested in starting something too. So my colleague and I, Bill Bowman, co-founder of Spinnaker, started looking for businesses that we might start. And we took a traditional market research approach, actually, and we went out and started interviewing potential customers on ideas we had. And we evaluated over the course of a year several ideas and discarded them. And along the way, we met two venture capitalists, a woman by the name of Jackie Morby, who was at that time the most senior woman in the venture capital community. She was a partner with TA Associates in Boston, and that was way back when women in venture capital were fairly rare. And Jackie was a pioneer and a visionary. And a young associate at TA, a fellow by the name of Jeff Chambers. And so we met them, and they actually funded Bill and I in our research as we started looking for a mini computer software business because the mini computer wave had happened. And as we worked our way through the ideas, we came upon the what was called at the time the microcomputer. I guess later it became called the personal computer. Mm-hmm. Largely, I think, because of IBM's nomenclature. But so we started looking at ideas for PCs, and Jeff and Jackie funded us travel expenses and things like that. And we went around talking to retailers all over the United States, and the retailers said, what we really need is good educational software. We have good games and good utilities, and what people weren't really thinking about it for business, so that was not anybody's mind. But what we really lack is we have parents who come in and ask for educational software. So we identified the hole in the market as educational software. And we came back to TA and we said, we want to start an educational software company. And Jackie was actually disappointed. She was on the board of Sierra Online, a game company. She really knew the game business well. Mm-hmm. She was expecting us to come back and want to start a game company, and she was prepared to fund it. When we came back and said we wanted to start an educational software company, she was not 100% sure at first what to do with the recommendation, but we had a pretty compelling business case based on our interviews with retailers. And so TA put the money in to start the company up. I think the initial investment was $800,000. And Bill and I quit our jobs and at BCG, and we seem to recall Bill had already quit. He was so determined to do something with entrepreneurial, so he had already quit at that point. I quit my job, and we started Spinnaker. We started it in a rented temporary office. Our desks were, our chairs actually backed up to each other. We had one phone. And when the phone would ring, we'd have to rotate our chairs to answer the phone depending on who the calls are. And we hired Priscilla my wife, who was a professional salesperson, and she was doing sales. We put her desk in the hallway, and sometimes we'd have to rotate 3 chairs to get her to the phone because it was a sales call. And we contracted with a local, which were actually 2 firms. It was in those days we thought about ourselves as a software publisher. So what we were doing was not so much creating the original software as working with independent developers who would create software, and we would publish their games with their names on it and stuff like that. So it's more of a book publishing model almost. So we were a software publisher, and we contracted with Tom Snyder Associates for 2 products that he was working on. I don't know if you know Tom Snyder, one of the great creative geniuses of the early days of the PC software revolution.
Yeah, I have his name. I haven't been able to interview him yet, but I'm aware of him.
It'll be one of the most interesting conversations you ever had when you talk to him. He's a very original thinker and funny, intelligent. And then we also contracted with a West Coast firm called Designware for 2 pieces of software, which I sort of designed from a conceptual viewpoint. And one of them was called Story Machine, and the other one was called FaceMaker. Story Machine was quite interesting. You could write a story, and then it would animate your story. And we had a vocabulary appropriate for the kids' age that we were shooting for. We could sort of predict what verbs they would have and things. And they implemented our designs. The other one they implemented was called FaceMaker, which was like an electronic Mr. Potato Head, but it had the educational objective of keyboard familiarity. So there was a game in it that required you to use all the keyboard. And they both became bestsellers, as did Tom's products, which were called Snooper Troops. And so that was formed the company on April 1st of 1982. We laughed. We said later this will be really funny one way or the other, that it's on the day that we're doing this. And we set the near impossible objective of shipping 4 products to retail on September the 1st. So it was an extremely busy summer, working with the software developers, designing packaging, getting the packaging produced physically, which was 4-color printing, had lead times associated with it. Opening a distribution channel. At the time, there were software distributors like SoftCell and Maricel, which I think was Trend Micro, actually. No, it was Micro D. It was Micro D, and SoftCell were the 2 big software distributors. We flew out, met with SoftCell, and asked them to react to our packaging, products, and markets. They gave us advice. And we adopted all of their advice because we had the philosophy, if we do what they say, they will have to get behind it. They'll have no excuse except to get behind it. And they really did.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. Was that the clamshell packaging, was that like part of your initial idea, or was that something that they thought was because it was such kind of a unique packaging?
Yeah, that was one of our ideas. They had, a lot of ideas around the graphics on it and what information we should have on the package, So we followed their advice But the clamshell packaging idea was actually ours. We were trying to differentiate it. So that era, the way software was packaged, it was often a disc or in a cassette tape. I mean, in a plastic bag.
Sure. Yeah.
So, with a mimeographed instructions. That was sort of the status of the educational software industry. We wanted to elevate it to a whole new level. And the clamshell packaging was part of that. We wanted to send a message, this is really different to the consumer. And the whole business plan was founded on applying professional sales and marketing to an industry that is in the plastic bag era of consumer presentation. There was a joke in the industry at the time that you could tell at an industry conference when it was the software day, because that was when all the campers would be in the parking lot. So the software industry was still a cottage thing, and we launched it with advertising, we launched it with retail promotions, we launched it with terrific packaging, and underneath that, really fabulous pieces of software that really did something different for the consumers. There's an old joke in the industry that nothing kills a bad product faster than good marketing. So we had good marketing, so it was really important that the products live up to it. So over the course of the summer, I mean, we were three people. We were two boys, a girl, and not even a dog. And we were outsourcing everything, of course, to try to just get stuff done. So we were sitting in our little one office, two desks, pushed back to back, Priscilla in the hallway, late August, and this truck driver comes walking up, and he says, "I have your packaging in the truck." We said, "Great, unload it, bring it up." He said, "Where's your forklift truck?" I was like, "Forklift truck? We only have one telephone. We don't have a forklift truck." So we went down there, and it was pallets of stuff. Of course, we never thought it through. We didn't have time. And we had nowhere to put it. So, Priscilla climbed into the cab. We called a local warehouse and rented some space. And Priscilla climbed into the cab with the truck driver, and off they went to unload our packaging. And the first production run we got a second office. We put a shrink wrap machine. That was this little shrink wrap machine. And the first time we did a packaging run, the clamshell packages all melted. The tolerance between the melt point of the package and the shrink wrap minimum temperature to shrink was very narrow, which was something we never in a million years thought about. Until there we are. We were all proud. We have this run going. We hired went to a temp agency and got some, quote, production workers. Mm-hmm. And we were making our first packaging run. We're just so excited, and all the packages melted. I was like, oh, no. So with a few hours of fiddling with temperatures, we got it to work. But as long as we used those packages, it was always an issue. And I had to be very, very careful about the temperature on the shrink wrap machine. We had like a 5-degree window that we had to run. So we managed to ship our products just like we promised on September the 1st, 4 titles. At the time, there was a bestseller list that was published by SoftSell, and it was the key marketing thing because retailers would look at it, and if you were on the list, they would want to carry your products because they were bestsellers. And so with bated breath, we waited for the first bestseller list. We launched it with a promotion at SoftSell to with their telemarketing people. We would give them a few bucks every time they sold something. You would actually stand there with rolls of cash and you'd walk around. Somebody would get an order and you'd put the money down in front of them, kind of thing.
Wow.
And which was SoftSell would manage which vendors could do it on which days. And spiffing the salespeople is called. So we had our spiffs. And we also had advertising that we were running in magazines designed to appeal to moms. I think we had Apple and IBM in the initial launch. Can't remember if the Atari, was the Atari 800 had come out? Anyway.
It came out in 79. But
79. So we would have had Atari 2 then. So we would have had those three. And the first soft sell list came out, and we had all four of our products were in the top 10.
Wow.
And from there, the company was off and running. Sales poured in. We got a national office, started hiring more people. And I think that I think it's fair to say, I don't believe it's an exaggeration to say that Bill and I and Priscilla, we invented the educational software market. It really didn't exist until we came along, and we put it on the map, established it as a category, brought much higher levels of product development, better products, innovative products, and professional marketing, and that reflected the quality of the underlying software for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And that category exists today because of that crazy summer of 1982, when Bill and Priscilla and I, in our little office with our little melting clamshell packages, put the whole thing together.
Yeah, you guys were certainly one of probably not the first, but one of the first to approach making software from a business perspective rather than programming is fun, computers are fun, let's make something, sort of perspective, I think. Yeah,
it had been a hobbyist market. It had been something that people did, at night after they got off of their jobs. And I think we perceived that the world was changing at the hardware and machine level. And the numbers were really starting to flow because the hardware people consumerized the devices, made it something that you could actually buy and use, as opposed to buy and build and play with and tinker with. And kids just love computers. I mean, one of the things that we observed was how natural. Now it's taken for granted. Everybody knows that if you can't figure out the UI on your iPhone, you give it to your 7-year-old and he helps you with it.
Sure.
But back then, no one had any experience with computers other than a few people at work. If you worked in the MIS department, you had some big mainframe that you had experience with. If you were an engineering student, you might have gotten to play with one in college. But we didn't have personal computers in our daily lives or any other device. And so the change was the Ataris and Apple and IBM and then very forcefully Commodore came in and consumerized it and made it affordable. And it turned out that kids just loved them, and so did adults. Don't get me wrong, especially gamers. But which I am, by the way. I consider I'm a gamer.
What do you play today?
Today,
yeah.
Today I'm playing I play a lot on the iPad because it's convenient. So I'm playing Star Wars Heroes, grinding my way up to level 85 on that.
Okay.
My heaviest gaming days were World of Warcraft. That was the main tank.
Sure.
In a guild with 240 people. I was second in command of it. I was in charge of personnel, so I had to hire and fire people in the guild. And that was quite an intense couple of years when I was playing World of Warcraft.
Nice.
It's almost like an addiction for me. I haven't played it in 3 or 4 years, and I recently logged on. It's like an alcoholic going into a bar. It's like a mistake, I felt that I logged into World of Warcraft just to do it. Kept my character alive all this time. And I could feel the tug, and some of my friends popped up. And my character name is Valk. And it's like, Valk, where you been? It's like, oh, no, this is terrible. I'm going to get sucked in again. It was almost like I had to pull my hands off the keyboard and run out of the room. So So anyway.
All right. So I interrupted you. You're saying kids love computers.
No, that's fine. I love talking about Warcraft, but it was a great experience. And I played games, throughout the whole history of the industry. Actually, before we started Spinnaker, I bought an Apple computer, and I played Castle Wolfenstein, the original Castle Wolfenstein. And I don't know if you remember, or if you've ever observed. I'm not sure how old you are, but
I played some Castle Wolfenstein. Oh yeah.
Okay, great. The little character when you would shoot the Nazi guards, and it would go like that. That was sort of the entire sound effect.
Yeah.
And so I was the first night I had my computer. Priscilla went to sleep, and this was before laptops, right? So I got the computer and the monitor I put beside the bed. I had the computer on my lap, and the only place we had a plug was on the other side of her. So I ran the cord over her, and we didn't have earphones or headphones or anything. So little Apple squeaky speaker, and I'm shooting Nazi guards, and Priscilla wakes up and rises up. What in the world is that sound? And I put my hand over to sort of hold her down, because if she moved any further, she was going to disconnect the cord, and I'd lose my game progress. But by holding her down, saying it's okay, I'm just shooting Nazi guards. So that was early on. That's hardcore. So anyway, we had. And one of the things that just happened was, 5-year-olds, 4-year-olds, they just loved the devices. They loved the computers. And this was 1982, when nobody really had that experience with children before. And we used to get kids in, and we'd do tests on our software with kids, and bring them in to use the games and watch them interact with it, and they were so natural. And for all, I think for everyone, for society, this was a revelation. This was the moment when the light bulb went on, which is when you sort of knew everything was going to be different. There was a personal computer that was affordable for a family, had been consumerized, so it was usable, and which kids had this natural affinity for. And so it became clear at that moment that everything would going forward would be digital increasingly, and that was quite an insight for 1984 or 82 when we were doing this initially. By 84, the industry was roaring. Everybody, the market was growing. Commodore 64 was selling like crazy. Atari 800s were selling like crazy. And they really took over the momentum from Apple and IBM for a long time during that whole 80s run. But in 82, when we brought in these kids for the first time, they saw their first computers. They saw their first computer games. They loved them. They would try stuff. Parents would say, the kids would start hitting the keys. The parents would say, "Now don't do that, you might break it." And we would say, "Well, they probably won't, and if they did, then we could fix it. And by the way, that's the point, if they could break it." But they were fearless, and that led to I think that the things we did as an industry in 1982 laid the foundation for the modern world that we live in today. There's no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to ask you about the word edutainment. I had read in an old article that you hated that word. I want to know.
I still hate it. Yeah.
I'd like to know the first time you heard it, if you remember, and why you hate it.
Well, first of all, it's a word without elegance, and it just if you were a poet, you would never use the word edutainment. It's a manufactured phrase, and what's wrong with educational software? I never understood why we needed another word for it. Our tagline was "We make learning fun," and that is just a more elegant way of saying the same thing. So we were an educational software company, and we had some brands because we were also multi-branded. The Spinnaker brand was an educational brand,
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't need. It was the educational values that we wanted to put forth, and we make learning fun. And so edutainment tried to create this category that didn't need to exist. There were games, there was entertainment, there was education. There was no reason why the experience of educational software had to be boring, a teacher standing there with a ruler rapping your knuckles if you got the answer wrong. That wasn't what it was about. Educational software changed the game fundamentally by providing a fun experience while one was learning. Also, there's a certain amount, many of our games, the educational part had to do with intellectual skills more than with facts. We weren't just multiplying 5 times 4 and the child answered 20 and got some sort of reward. Often the kinds of things we were working on were estimation skills, planning skills, problem-solving skills, and those kinds of skills are best developed in a game setting. So I thought edutainment was just, it was an ugly word, sounded weird, created a category that didn't need to exist, and obscured somewhat the underlying values that we were promoting. So we never used it once in any marketing, and I went on record and said I hate the word.
Nice.
I still do.
Did you get feedback from kids? I mean, not like they could tweet at you, but did you ever get letters or anything?
Oh yeah, we got lots of fan mail. They'll we come actually literally in the mail, and often from parents, not so much from kids. But we get letters, and teachers loved us. And the feedback we got from kids was more observing them using the software.
Sure.
Which we did a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
So and then we all have private lives too. I had nieces that grew up on Spinnaker. I never had children myself. Grew up on Spinnaker Software. Bill had 7 kids, and we would often use them as an instant focus group. And so
I found some old pictures of his kids in front of the machines, and kind of adorable.
Yeah. It was, we could get them in, and we had a deadline tomorrow, and we needed some feedback today, so we would grab Bill's kids, customer feedback was really important. We didn't have the mechanisms you have today, like social media, but we went out and sought out opportunities to get feedback from kids, teachers, and parents.
Nice. But what mistakes did you make? Any products that were complete flops, or just things that you should have done differently? Well,
from a business viewpoint, the market took a sharp downturn in '84.
Yeah.
And that had to do with too many competing pieces of hardware. The consumer got confused. So between '82 and '84, there were something like 10 personal computers manufactured. There was the TI 99-4A. There was the VIC-20 from Commodore.
Mm-hmm.
There was the Sinclair. There was the Atari 400, the Atari 800.
Mm-hmm.
And we had just too many competing products in the market. And the VCR came along. And the VCR hurt the computer industry badly at first. It switched discretionary consumer spending from PCs to the VCR. And the VCR had only 2 formats, and one was dominant, VHS over Beta. And so the consumer, one of the things about consumer businesses is standardization precedes high levels of adoption in every case. The consumer does not want to be stuck with a device that has been abandoned by the industry. So there was chaos at the hardware level during that time period, and until it settled out. So there was a sharp downturn in the market in Christmas of '84, and '85 was sort of the nuclear winter of the industry. Here's a question for you. When do you want to have a low market share? The answer, when industry shipments are net negative. And in '85, retailers returned more educational software to publishers than they bought. So the industry was net negative in shipments. And in that number, Spinnaker was positive in that number. We actually had positive shipments in '85, but the industry was negative on average. So, or in total. So, very tough time period, '85 and '86 and '87. And then it sort of came back, and it was really what brought it back was the IBM PC clone. When the PC clone came out, it was affordable and in the mass merchant channel, and that restored the market to growth. And so it was a much better industry after that happened, and the market rallied around the PC clone. The consumer purchases, the retailers, software developers, everything rallied around that, and that got it back on a growth plan. I think if I look back at our product decisions, in terms of, so what do? We added additional brands. We did a licensing deal with Fisher-Price, and we brought out Fisher-Price Software, one of the giant brands in the for younger children is Fisher-Price, and that was sort of the deal of the century, because we were still a small software company, and we managed to get a licensing deal with one of the established mega brands.
Sure.
And our Fisher-Price line was extremely successful. We also wanted to lower the price of software, and we used the Fisher-Price brand to do that. No one could argue the quality if you had Fisher-Price's name on it. And so we established a new price level, which at the time I think was $20 for a game, when it had been closer to $50 was sort of the traditional price. And that price point we thought was important in the mass merchant channel. It turned out to be. That was hugely successful. We then had two lines of pure games. Well, I say pure games, but pure games. One of them was our Tellurian brand, which we licensed the rights to science fiction, big science fiction titles. So we had, Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke, Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. We had Dragon World from, what's his first name? Price is his last name. And we had, and those were pure adventure games. Robert Zelazny, Nine Princes and Amber, my personal favorite. Mm-hmm. And we also had a line of children based on children's works literature, which we call Wyndham Classics, and so we had Alice in Wonderland, Treasure Island, and these were games, but still, when you're dealing with someone who's 7 years old, there's really no difference between play and education. It's the same experience, and the best game we ever did was called Below the Root, and it was in our Wyndham Classics line. And it was brilliantly innovative. The software developer was a guy who sadly passed away a few years ago, way too young. But his name was Dale Disharoon. And Dale was a teacher in Town in California. and got into software development early. And then we came along, discovered Dale. He did many of our bestsellers. Alphabet Zoo, for example, was his. Kid Writer was his. Kid Writer was probably our single most successful title during that time period. It was a word processor for kids, and they could illustrate their books, or stories, not books really, but stories, with artwork that was included, so they could make a scene and write something about it, and then have another page, and then make another scene and write something about it. Sold millions of copies. It was just monstrously successful. That was Dale's. And so he did Below the Root. So, I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's really worth reading.
No, I've not.
It's a children's classic.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it works is the plot of the book is there's this civilization of human beings that lives in giant trees on this planet. And they have tree houses, and they can sort of fly or glide with their suits from one tree to another, and they live in this really gentle society, you think, and parents sort of frighten their kids with stories about people who live below the roots, underground, and there are some disturbing things that are going on in this society, and you have to go below the root to find out what the true story is, and so it's a game of exploration, of mystery, flying from tree to trees, going into the subterranean area, and Dale developed this completely innovative world view where you could climb the trees and jump from one to the other and fly and explore. And it was just beautiful on Ataris and Commodores. It was just stunning, the graphics. And the gameplay was completely different than anything that had come before. And, that I've always felt badly about that because it did not become the monster hit it deserved to be. And I always felt like we just didn't market it well, or something got lost along the way. Mm-hmm. That game should be in the Hall of Fame somewhere because it was so fun to play and so different. I would still stand up today, frankly, as a game if somebody was to do it on an iPad or something. So I think, I still have, my sister still has a working Commodore 64. We have all the games at Christmas. Nice. Sometimes we play them. And it's still good. Below the Root is absolutely a good game today. And if I look back, I think that was one mistake we made, which was we didn't market that game well enough. Other things we did, I think we really thought that, I think from an educational viewpoint, we escalated. Our view is we were working on the higher level skills, things like planning and estimation and problem solving. And I think parents often wanted more mundane educational titles. A company called Davison came along that had a product called Mass Blaster that was just pure flashcards. 4 times 4 is 16, and get a point. And if you get to the end, you get some sort of simple graphical reward. I think we viewed that as not exploiting the medium. And in retrospect, and even at the time, we had this perception that we were giving too much credit, perhaps, to the parents to understand the potential of the medium. And they understood flashcards. While we knew the kids didn't like Davison software, parents loved it. So at some point, that soft sell bestseller list became dominated by Davison. And I've always sort of felt like, again, we didn't explain ourselves well enough because the kids did not like their products.
And if you're not having fun learning, then you must be learning, right?
Yeah, I guess so. It was sort of a step back, but it was very popular. the Davis, from a commercial viewpoint. They really nailed it better than we did to a certain extent. We were trying to push it to a new level, and they said, "Nah, we'll just do flashcards."
Yeah.
And parents bought the flashcards really easily because they could understand it. And then they sort of didn't notice that the kids weren't using it. So they were sneaking back and playing those old Spinnaker games they'd gotten a year or two ago. But they heard our momentum from a business viewpoint. Davidson did. So, what else?
So tell me about the end of Spinnaker.
Well, the company diversified into small business software at some point, really based on the IBM PC clone. The IBM PC clone was in the mass merchants, which was where our distribution channel was, and it had some differences from the Ataris and Commodores. One is every machine had a disk drive, which, believe it or not, was a big deal, as opposed to the cartridge-based software that we were making for the Ataris and the Commodores. And a disk drive meant you could store your own data. It had a really great keyboard and a number pad, this is pre-laptop, so we all thought number pads were important. Every machine came with a number pad. So we started to think about small business applications. It did not have good sound. It was really a step back from the Ataris and Commodores from the viewpoint of sound, and it had unbelievably poor graphics. No joystick, unless you bought a card to go in and installed it. We joked it was the $300 joystick, and this was back when computers were $500. So you would pay $500 and $300 more to get a joystick. So we didn't expect that to work much, but for certain types of applications, it was really good. It was really good for invoicing a customer. It was really good for, especially once the mouse and graphical user interfaces came out. It was quite good at making things like advertising flyers that you could, put them in the windshield wipers of cars at the mall. We again, studying how the users would use these machines, we didn't see it as an educational or game machine. We saw it as a small business productivity machine. And to produce what we called, at the time we deemed revenue-producing documents. Revenue-producing documents are things like advertisements and invoices. And so we thought that the market would pivot and become more of a small business market. So we brought out a line of small business software, the first and the most successful of which was called WindowWorks. We saw Windows coming. We actually started working on Windows 2, which you probably have never seen. It was pretty ugly. And there was something called a single application environment. So you could bundle that with your software. It would install on the machine. You'd have Windows for your application. And we predicted that it would be Windows would be successful for the PCs because graphical user interface was very useful for producing revenue-producing documents, page layout. So we, which you otherwise didn't have without a GUI. So and that line of software became extremely successful. The small business software really propelled the company. We acquired another company, which was actually a public company, and ended up going public. We were on we were listed on NASDAQ. I actually ran a public software company for 3 years, or as I prefer to refer to it, 12 quarters. I would not wish being a CEO of a public company on my worst enemy. It is the worst possible imaginable life. You are living under constant scrutiny. You say the wrong thing, it gets reported in the press, and you have a public relations disaster. And this was before the internet I can't now. It would be 10 times worse. I would. So we operated as a public company, which is walking a daily tightrope, and for 3 years, and then sold the company to a Canadian software company that was trying to do a roll-up of software companies. Canada is sort of an interesting market. They had a 90% share of the Canadian tax market. And in Canada, the government encourages companies to work together because they view the big competitors from the U.S. So what would be viewed as collusion in the U.S., in Canada, a government minister might organize a meeting where the companies get together and decide to work together. Mm-hmm. And so this company had, through a series of government-sponsored acquisitions, actually ended up with 90% of the Canadian tax software market. Well, tax does not have any competition across the borders, right? I mean, U.S. tax software companies weren't competing in Canada at all. So they had a local monopoly, and they were extremely profitable from that. And they decided to expand into the U.S., and it was called SoftKey. And so they acquired first Spinnaker. They later acquired the Learning Company and Broderbund, which was Learning Company was one of the most innovative educational software providers ever around. They did fabulous stuff from an innovation perspective. And Broderbund was a leading game company. And so they acquired Broderbund, Spinnaker, and the Learning Company, and then later sold themselves to Mattel. And so that was sort of the end of Spinnaker, though. When they acquired Spinnaker, I left, and the company was merged into this roll-up of many companies. I think they adopted the name the Learning Company, and then sold themselves to Mattel a few years later.
What do you do today?
Well, today, so I took a couple of years off after Spinnaker, and which was a mistake because it was 94 and 95, and that's when the very first internet companies.
Nothing was going on those years. Yeah, you didn't miss much.
Yeah, right. I went car racing actually, and I became a professional sports car racer, and I sort of missed that first wave of the internet. And then in 96, I realized my mistake and wanted to get back because I'd done the PC revolution, and revolutions are fun, and so I wanted to get involved. I mean, when you're in a technology-based revolution like the early days of the personal computer software industry, you have this sense that you can change the world. And there just aren't other jobs like that, where what you do is going to change everything. And I had that when Bill and I and Priscilla were starting Spinnaker. We were changing the world. And we were in an industry where everybody thought we were. And we were. There was this article written in the Boston Globe about our Christmas party in 1983. And the reporter said, "What is it like to be young and in a software company in Cambridge?" And he described our party. And what he actually talked about was the sense of changing the world. So I missed that. I realized that the internet was doing it. So I joined Northern Light as its CEO. The company at the time was a software development project in the basement of another software company in Cambridge. So we were starting in the basement, like all good software companies should. And you've got a garage or a basement, right? Those are your options.
Sure.
Or your mother's bedroom. Those are the three. So, or a bedroom in your mother's house. Those are the three options. So we were in the basement, so we had the first check mark. So I joined Northern Light, raised venture capital for it, spun it out of the software company, and we did the internet boom and bust cycle. We were a player in the early days of the search industry, pre-Google. Got caught in the downturn of the internet economy around 2000. Actually sold the company, and I left it again. And then the company we sold it to went into bankruptcy. They did, it was called Divine, and they did 28 acquisitions. We were their 17th one. The 18th one bankrupted them. And I went into the bankruptcy court, and I bought the assets of Northern Light back for 0.6 cents on the dollar. I think I might have overpaid. I could have gotten it for 0.5 cents if I'd have been a little sharper negotiator. And then Priscilla and I restarted Northern Light from scratch, and I'm still operating it today, 15 years later. And we make enterprise research portals. We build specialized search engines for companies to use in their marketing, market strategy, and competitive intelligence departments. And it's very interesting. Search is a fascinating problem that dominates our lives. And one of the fun things we're doing right now is the application of machine learning to the problems of business strategy. So we're trying to get the machine to observe the content flow of things like business news and market research reports and interpret it for the users so that instead of doing a search and getting a search result, you read the report that the machine generates on what happened today. Pretty interesting stuff. We have about 50 employees, I think the machine learning AI world might be the third revolution that I participate in. I did the software, the personal computer software revolution. I did the internet revolution, though I was 2 years late to join it. Now I'm involved in the machine learning, artificial intelligence revolution. So, old habits die hard, I guess. We are changing the world again, though. The machines are able to do things that we have never been able to do before.
Yeah.
And it's pretty exciting. I think the fears about it are crazy. What I want to be surrounded by a staff of robotic assistants who can make my life better.
That sounds good.
I want staff. Everybody can have staff in the robotic world of the future. We can all have staff. Think of how productive we'll be. So
nice.
That's what I'm up to now.
Excellent. All right, I think this is my last question. If you could send a message to the kids, who were playing Spinnaker Software back in the 80s are now adults and listening to this podcast. So if you could send a message to those people, what would you tell them?
Well, I certainly hope Bill and Priscilla and I made a contribution to your lives and made the digital age more accessible to you. And I would encourage you to remember the values that we had in our games. We did make learning fun, but we also promoted positive social values in every case. And I would say, if you were to look at your kids, what will the world be that they live in? And what can you do to prepare them for that? The way Bill and I and Priscilla, to the best we could, tried to prepare you for the world that you are living in, which is dominated by computing devices and software at every turn. Maybe your success stems in part from that preparation, and your kids will need the same preparation for the future that they live in, though the particulars will change. That's the message I would send.
Excellent. Thank you so much, David.
I hope some of those old Spinnaker users, kids, I won't say customers because they weren't buying it, their parents were, but I hope some of them remember our games fondly. I really do.
I know many of us do, and thank you for your service, sir.
Certainly. Well, you have a good day, sir. I enjoyed the conversation.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.